Hi, my name is Sebastian Matteau, and today I want to show you how you can use advanced loop operations in OpenSesame to create a visual search experiment without using any kind of Python coding. So we're going to see how you can create a type of experiment that a lot of people would normally make using Python inline scripting in OpenSesame, using only the user interface of OpenSesame. Now, let me show you what the type of visual search experiment that we're going to create. It's very simple. What we want to have is a fixation dot in the center, and then 8 stimuli around this fixation dot. And one of these stimuli is always an F or an H. So here you see an F, that will be the target. And if the participants see an F, they press the left key. And if they see an H, they press the right key. And all the other letters are distractors. Now, what makes this type of experiment a little bit complicated to implement in OpenSesame and in other software packages is that the locations of all those letters, all those stimuli, need to be randomized, right? Because right now the F is at the top, but of course the F shouldn't always be at the top, because then it wouldn't be search anymore. So it sometimes should occur here, sometimes here, etc. So we're going to use a clever technique to implement this randomization in OpenSesame using only the user interface. Now, for this tutorial, I'm assuming that you have a little bit of knowledge of OpenSesame, right? So if you don't, I would advise that you do one of the basic tutorials or the beginner tutorial first. And also, I'm going to set up the basic experiment quite quickly, right? Just to save us all a bit of time. So we're going to start with the default template. I'll click on it. Now, the default template has only a getting started notepad in it, which is just a thing with a little bit of information. I'll select it, permanently delete, yes. And a sketchpad called welcome. Now, a sketchpad, as you know, is an item that you use to present visual stimuli. Right now it just says OpenSesame 3.1. So, but we're going to use it to display our instructions. So I rename it to instructions, and I change the text to instructions. If you see an F, press the left key, right? That's the instruction. If you see an H, press the right key. Press any key to begin. Okay, those are the instructions. Now, then I'm going to pick up a loop item and drag it after the instructions. Now, a loop item is an item that runs another item multiple times, and it also allows you to define your independent variables. In our case, the loop corresponds to a block of trials, so I'll rename it to block loop. And the item that it's going to run is a sequence, which I'll pick up from the item toolbar, drop it, insert into block loop, and I will call this trial sequence. So the logic is this sequence right here is called the trial sequence, corresponds to one trial, and the block loop is going to run this one trial multiple times so that we have multiple trials in our experiment. Okay, now what is our trial sequence going to look like? Well, we're going to start with a sketchpad that is going to give us a fixation dot. So I'll add it here, I'll rename it to fixation dot, draw a fixation dot in the center, and change the duration from key press, which means that the fixation dot would be shown until the participant presses a key, to say 1 second, right? So the fixation dot stays on the screen for 1 second. Then I pick up another sketchpad, I'll drag it into the trial sequence, and this is going to be our main sketchpad. You could say it's going to be our search display. Now, the search display also has a fixation dot in the center, right? So the search display is the display that should look like this during the experiment. It should have a fixation dot in the center and then all the stimuli around it. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to assume that there is a variable called stimulus1, stim1, and we're going to draw that one here at the top. I'll make it a little bit bigger, say 48 pixels font size. Now, what this means is not that OpenSesame is going to literally print out or show stim1 between square brackets. Rather, OpenSesame will interpret stim1 as a variable because it is enclosed in these square brackets, right? That's the OpenSesame way to indicate that something is a variable. So for example, if stim1 would have the value f, then here we would see an f. Now, and we're going to do the same thing around the clock. So here I will draw stim2. Here I will draw stim3. Stim4. Stim5. And there we go. 6. Stim7, and the final one, stim8. Okay, right, so just to repeat, during the experiment we're not actually going to see all this. What we're going to see are 8 letters in this square around the fixation dot, corresponding to the values of the variables stim1, stim2 through stim8. Okay? Now, the duration of the search display right now is key press, which would mean that the search display is going to be shown until the participant presses a key. We don't actually want to do this, we want to change it to 0, which doesn't mean that the search display is going to be shown only for 0 milliseconds. What it means is that the experiment is going to advance right away to the next item, which is going to be a keyboard response, which I'm going to drop below the search display. Rename it to keyboard response. Right, so the idea is that the search display has a 0 millisecond duration, which is why immediately after the search display is shown, the OpenSesame advances to the keyboard response to collect the key press. And that's exactly what we want. Now, the keyboard response item doesn't need a lot of configuration. We're just going to say, okay, we only allow the left and right responses because we don't want the participant accidentally to press the spacebar or something. And we give a timeout of, say, 5 seconds. It's quite tricky, so a timeout of 5 seconds is okay, I think. Now, after the keyboard response, we're going to provide a little bit of feedback to the participants. I always think that's a good idea. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a green fixation dot. So, click, make it green, draw it in the center for 500 milliseconds. If the participants respond correctly, and we're going to show a red dot. So the same trick, select the fixation dot, make it red, draw it in the center, change duration to 500. If the participant made some mistake. Now, right now, this is not correct yet, of course, because right now we're going to first see a green dot and then a red dot. So what we want to do is we're going to use this run if statement here in the trial sequence to indicate that the green dot should be shown only if the variable correct is 1, and the red dot only if the variable correct is 0. Now, the variable correct is one of those variables that is built into OpenSesame and that automatically has the value 1 after a correct response and 0 after an incorrect response. Now, to do that, of course, we need to tell OpenSesame what the correct response actually is, and we will do that in a block loop. Alright, so but just to review the trial sequence, we start with the fixation dot, then we show the search display, then we collect the keyboard key press, and then if the response was correct, we show a green dot, otherwise we show a red dot. So that's perfect. Okay? So let's now move on to the block loop in which we're going to define our independent variables. Alright, so here in this table below the block loop, in the block loop we have space to define our independent variables. Now, then the first variable that we're going to define is correct response, which will define the correct response, right? So basically OpenSesame will compare the value of this correct response variable with the value of the actual response that is provided and use that to decide whether the response was correct or not. Now, on some trials the correct response is left, on other trials it is right. Now, on which trials is that? Well, that is, left is the correct response if we have an F, and right is the correct response if we have an H. So we're going to define a variable called stim1, and it is either an F or an H. And right, the task was to press left if there was an F and right if there was an H. So we've already defined now one of our 8 stimuli, right? We also need to find stim2, stim3, stim4, stim5, stim6, stim7, and stim8. Well, I'm just going to type more or less random letters here. So let's say an L, an E, W, B, a Y, a U, and an X. And it's going to be the same for both types of trials. Right, so we have only two types of trials really. We have trials with an F and we have trials with an H. They differ in exactly where the stimuli are, but otherwise they're identical, right? Now, and then to make it a bit more of a complete experiment, we're going to change the repeat value to say 4. And once we do that, OpenSesame will tell you trial sequence will be called 8 times in random order. Right? So all rows occur 4 times. In other words, we have 4 trials with an F and 4 trials with an H. Now, if I run this, it will work, but you probably already realize what the problem is going to be. But let's just take a look. I run it, quick run it, okay? If you've seen F, press the left key. If you've seen H, press the right key. So let's begin. Here we go. Okay, an H at the top. Did you see it at the top? An H again at the top. An F at the top, left. An F at the top, left. An F at the top, left. An H at the top. Again at the top. An F. Right, so this is a problem. The F or the H is always at the top. So it's not a visual search experiment, right? Because the participant knows where the target is going to be. It's going to be at the top. So how are we going to change this? How are we going to improve this? Well, we're going to use what is called an advanced loop operation, and more specifically, we're going to use a horizontal shuffle. Now, to understand to explain what I mean by this, let's just do it. So, to apply these advanced loop operations, you need to edit the script of the loop item, and you do that by clicking here and then say View Script. Now, then we have a whole bunch of lines that just correspond to our loop, and what we're going to add is shuffle horis for shuffle horizontally, and then we're going to indicate all our variables that we want to shuffle horizontally. Now, this sounds a bit mysterious, right? But you will understand in a minute what horizontal shuffling means. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to shuffle stim1 to stim8. Okay. Say apply and close. Okay, there we go. Now let's take a preview you can in OpenSesame you can generate a preview of what your loop is going to look like to understand what the horizontal shuffling does. So what you see here in the left, we have our correct response column, which is just left or right in a random order, right? Because we've randomized the order. And then you have our stim1 to stim8. But what you see is that in stim1, we had initially only F and H letters, right? And now you see that actually the F is, in this case it is here, in this case it is here. Up, here we have an H, here we have an H. In other words, that's what the horizontal shuffling does. It basically takes a row and it shuffles the row. So normally if you shuffle a trial list, you would shuffle vertically, right? You would shuffle like this. You would shuffle, for example, as you can see in the correct response column, it has been shuffled vertically, you could say. But the horizontal shuffling shuffles all the variables in one row. So it basically exchanges values between stim1, stim2, etc. randomly. Now, and that's exactly what we want, because that will randomize the positions of the stimuli on the display. So let's take a look at what the experiment looks like now. So we have the same instruction, and now it's going to be much more difficult, right? So I'm going to try to do it as fast as possible. So, okay, yeah, the F is at the bottom. F, bottom left. H, bottom left again. Right, so you see the positions are randomized now. F, H at the bottom, H at the top this time, H bottom left, okay, and so on. Okay, so that's it, that's what I wanted to show. So now we have used this horizontal shuffling technique to implement a visual search experiment of the type that people usually would implement using a Python inline script. And while I absolutely don't think that there's anything against using Python inline scripts, I think this shows that the user interface for OpenSesame is quite flexible and allows you to implement quite sophisticated paradigms using a minimum amount of effort. Thank you very much.